Jesse Lipscomb, your host, the Black Elevator. We just keep rising up and up and up because what are we looking for? A better Black future. And that's what Mark Beckles is here to do and to talk to us about today. He's going to let us know how RBC specifically has been doing their part in making sure that they are paving the way to ensure proper representation and proper access for all those who may not have had it in the past. But also in his own personal life, he has taken some amazing strides, visited and broke bread with some amazing people and learned so many things that I think will be very beneficial to all of our lives. So let's jump into that chat right now.
This way, swear you could get it, it's not rain.
Mark, welcome to the Black Elevator. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you on the podcast. We've had some chats over the last month or so, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you, so welcome. So I heard that my shirt, I was in Toronto, I was speaking at the Giants of Africa conference with Masai Ujiri and the Raptors, and as a tribute he does every year since Nelson Mandela passed. But I hear there is a connection with yourself and possibly his foundation. You mind sharing a little bit of that?
It was around ensuring that we were building capability around early childhood education and access to learning and things like that, so that future generations of young South Africans would have opportunity. And to see a man who had spent 27 years in jail, obviously be freed in 1990, and then go on 4 years later to lead his country from apartheid to democracy, and then after serving as the country's first post-apartheid president, mobilize himself and his networks yet again to say, well, the work isn't done. We need to support Black South Africans and ensure that they are ready to take over and lead this democracy. How can I say no to an opportunity like that? And it was certainly a life-changing experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you said too, Madiba's influence and ripples throughout the entire planet are often felt and reminded every year when people do celebrate it. And I'm guessing it's fair to say that, a lot of those teachings and practices have probably, worked their way into the work that you do now. You lead major social inclusion work at RBC, and like inside, and being able to actually see, some of that work that you've learned throughout your life, but also the stuff you're doing right now. So maybe you could even touch on like what you're doing now, and maybe how a couple of the things that you've learned when you were with that foundation, working with Nelson Mandela, how that's affected your work today.
Perhaps the most important thing that I learned through working with the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund is you got to keep people at the center of everything that you do. The betterment of people at the center of everything you do, and you learn to visualize faces and individuals at the center of everything that you do, and that in fact keeps you grounded. It keeps you focused. It keeps you sort of connected to the higher purpose of your work, because the minute it becomes about operations or about marketing or about IT or about all the other peripheral things that are important, it actually distracts you from the fact that what you're trying to do is improve the lot of people. And so I have been fortunate to be able to bring that into the work that I do right now. In my role at RBC, I have the privilege of leading our most significant social impact programs, be it RBC Future Launch, which is a $500 million 10-year commitment to empowering young people for the future of work, or RBC Tech for Nature, which is a multi-million-dollar investment that invests in technology solutions to enhance our environment and reduce climate risk, or RBC Emerging Artists, which actually supports artists in Canada across multiple genres to help them move from emerging to emerged, such that they can actually make a decent living, bring their creative content to the marketplace, really establish Canada as a center of cultural activity, if you will. And quite frankly, strengthen their contribution to what is essentially a $52 billion contribution to Canada's GDP and drive our economy. So those are the most significant bodies of work that I lead here at RBC. But I'm also privileged to be involved in our diversity and equity and inclusion work. I have the opportunity to work with stakeholders across the country, be they elected officials, policymakers, think tanks, other stakeholders, on a range of policy issues that address youth, that address artists, that address climate-related issues. And then, of course, how do we make this all relevant to 87,000 employees across this organization, who essentially all are ambassadors for our higher purpose at RBC, which is helping clients thrive and communities prosper.
Right.
Clients thrive when communities prosper, and when communities prosper, clients thrive. So the two are not mutually exclusive. And the work that I do sits right in the intersection of that purpose statement.
Interesting. One of the things you said too, that idea of like when communities thrive, the people will prosper. And I think in the past, a lot of the time that's always been true, but it's that operational definition of communities and who's involved in that community in order to say who's actually prospering. And I assume that's a lot of the reason where you get to have a new lens or a different lens, and to ensure that that representation actually exists, and we're actually helping those communities that represent the country we actually live in. That's fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that, we as an organization, and I think as a society more broadly, are really actively beginning to take stock around, who's at the table, who's not at the table, who's been historically barriered, whose voices have we not been hearing, whose voices have we excluded. And to the extent that we're doing that work and sort of advancing that work, it's actually allowing us to sort of implement more authentic solutions and more authentic approaches to address the issues that are specific to some communities where perhaps other privileged groups haven't had to confront, haven't had to address.
Actually, Mark, give me a second here. Give me some examples of those issues. We often talk about it in broad terms, and I hear that a lot. But like, if we're talking specific issues that maybe some of the privileged community members don't even realize, and then maybe some of the marginalized that you've noticed, what are some of the top ones that have come up that are really important for you?
Absolutely. So I would say when we look at representation in corporate Canada would be one example. A number of organizations, focus on diversity and inclusion, but oftentimes the real work is that of equity. That is to say, you can actually measure progress in numbers, or you can measure progress in the way you are shifting the culture of your organization to make sure that everyone has a fair shot at opportunity. Mm-hmm. If I were to look at what is happening writ large across, many organizations on Bay Street, RBC included, we are actually having those conversations to understand, sort of the employee experience, employees who have often felt that they were barriered from opportunity on the basis of how they look, how they sound, what their culture, their faith, their dress might be. And the unconscious biases that lead to that quote unquote exclusion. So then, you flip that to say, well, what does inclusion look like? And inclusion isn't just a number. Inclusion is an organization understanding the structures that actually create barriers and systemically removing those barriers to ensure then that people who are capable, regardless of what they look like, regardless of, who they sound like, regardless of who they love, regardless of how they identify, do have access to those opportunities that others, purely on the basis of their the skin color they were born with at birth, seem to have privileged access to. And so what we're seeing then is greater representation on Bay Street, not just in the junior levels of organizations, but at the most senior levels of organizations. You're seeing You're seeing the most senior executives across this country sitting down and having those conversations with their employees to understand what is happening. You're seeing, in the case of, for example, financial services, increased access to capital to support entrepreneurship. It is changing, and it is changing at a dramatic pace. Do we all need to do more?
Yeah.
Absolutely. We all need to do more. But what I love about working for RBC in particular is that we're not just talking about it. I work for a CEO that is actually leading the charge and has taken personal ownership of this.
Right.
That gives me hope.
I like a couple of things you said that I really like. I like the choice of equity versus equality, and I think that's a very important to distinguish the difference. The idea of saying, "Hey, well, now we'll just give everybody the same thing and everything's equal now," which doesn't really give any kind of onus to the fact that we haven't started at the same place. Equity means we need to do extra in certain places in order for things to catch up and be at the right place. You were also mentioning, some of the systemic issues that we're trying to tackle, and this one, I feel like it's the elephant in the room when we talk about a bank, right? So we talk about systemic racism and white supremacy being thread throughout it all over the place, and capitalism's at the heart of that, as is colonialism. So like working for an institution where money and the accumulation of money and hoping everyone makes more money, which we are, I believe, probably in agreement with its racist origins. How do you juggle those two things and still try to walk that right path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on a personal level, I understand that capitalism and the way that some organizations have sort of formed over time have prioritized the interests of a few over the interests of the many. I totally understand that. 100 years later, 150 years later, we live in modern societies that actually challenge a lot of sort of the vestiges, a lot of the structures that led to the inequity that exists today. And ultimately, again, I am privileged to work for an organization that is, focused on, being the kind of corporate citizen that is focused on ensuring that a majority of Canadians enjoy their fair share of the Canadian promise, the Canadian franchise, in spite of what history has written, in spite of what has happened in the past. And quite frankly, I say to folk all the time, we can't rewind the clock and rewrite history, but we can fast forward the clock and make history. So then how do we make history? Well, we make history by confronting the issues that actually create these social divisions, that actually exclude people from opportunity, that exile people to poverty. We can fast forward the clock and rewrite history by saying we're not going to put off to tomorrow what can be done today. We can we can make history by saying that we're going to stop excluding people on the basis of race and culture and all these other things that have gotten in the way of opportunity and access and so on, and to say, Jesse, you've got the capability, Mark, you've got the capability. I am giving you the opportunity, not on the basis that you are this or that, but purely because you have what it takes to succeed. And and those are the conversations that we are actively having. So that I say with complete transparency, I'm not wasting energy going backward to rewrite history. I want to be part of how we write history going forward.
No, I love it. The way of the frog, always forward, never backwards. I read this on a park bench a long time ago, and it stuck with me forever. I think it's so true. And the reason I even bring that up is because I grapple with it, as do many other individuals living in the society that we live in, and understanding, the origin story of something can be very nefarious, but that doesn't necessarily mean what has been created out of it can't still be used for something much more beautiful, much more inclusive. And you're a testament to it yourself. I mean, as people tune in, and ideally, young brown and black faces see people like ourselves having these conversations, and knowing that there's people inside doing the work for us, so that we can all have access, as you've talked about, that idea of opening access and allowing, pulling the curtains back and being transparent. There's many industries where transparency's in the past always kind of been, we don't talk about that, we don't talk about that. But the more that we pull it back, we can see where there's room for us. And, the idea, like you mentioned just now, about, ensuring that we're not hiring people based on race. And the first piece is actually that understanding. A lot of people don't know they're doing that, right? Those unconscious bias, when they didn't realize that wasn't why they didn't call them back, right? And so it's that uncovering of our own biases in order to move forward to that next step. Is that some of the work that happens internally at RBC as well?
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time listening to our colleagues writ large across the organization, and quite frankly, you can't fix what you don't know. You can't you can't listen to what you're not trained to hear, and you can't hear unless you're listening. And so, the good news here is that, I would say that unlike any other point in our history, we have become a listening and learning organization. And as we listen, we learn, and as we learn, we evolve, and as we evolve, we grow. And I would say, and I think this has been the same for most organizations across the world, at least organizations with a conscience, is that the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, May the 26th to be exact, was a galvanizing moment for everyone, right? Where, the slow death of a human being under the knee of an indifferent officer, I think, caused us all to sort of check our humanity, so to speak, and to say to ourselves collectively, what are we to do here, and what do we need to fix here? And is that emblematic of systemic bias, not just in that case, the police force, but where else does that level of systemic bias or racism exist, such that we need to confront it internally as organizations, so that we can fix it externally? And I would say to you that one of the proudest moments for me was when our CEO declared RBC's actions against systemic racism on July the 6th. Well, you don't declare actions unless you acknowledge that there are issues that you need to confront. And those actions were actually the result of talking to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of employees across the organization, of all stars and stripes, to say, what do we need to do differently as an organization? And that came on the heels of focusing on diversity and inclusion for the previous decade, most of which worked, but where there were gaps. And so the conversations in the wake of the George Floyd murder allowed us to address very intentionally the gap. And the work is always in the last mile. The work of any journey is in the last mile. We've started, I think, that last mile. It's going to be a long mile, but we started that work.
Yeah, as you're speaking right now, and we're talking about George Floyd lynching, the murder that happened, and the elevation of how sensitive, I would say, people were, in a good and in a bad way, but able to see things they didn't see, feel things they hadn't felt before. And I imagine even the pandemic has a piece of that as well, where we have a lot more time with ourselves, can't escape a lot of things. But as we're talking about that and the idea of like always forward, never backwards, I think I want to say that with a caveat, because I think it's very important that we do look at history repeating itself. I mean, we can talk about Emmett Till when things like this have happened before, and how did society react then? And are we doing it differently? So being able to take, snapshots of what we've done, because the unfortunate part is we've seen this before. And if I'm betting, we'll probably see it again, but what is it we're doing better so that the ramifications aren't so severe? And so when you look at with RBC and their reactions to incidents like that or things in the past, have you noticed anything where like next time or when something like this happens, here's what we could have done better and what you're bringing forward into the unfortunate futures that will exist? I don't think, as you said, it's a long last mile, which means there'll be bumps and hurdles. So considering what you've learned during this one, what might you do differently moving forward?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I don't think there's a simple answer to it. I would say, to your point, there are always going to be bumps along the way. I think it's how how we respond to the bumps that will determine whether, like the frog, we keep going forward, or we allow progress to be stalled because we over focus on the bump itself. So I think that is part of it, is that we have to acknowledge that we're all human beings and we're going to make mistakes, but we have to sort of resolve in ourselves that, notwithstanding the challenges that we face along the way, we just got to keep moving forward. And if you look at this historically, for the last 400 years, the privilege that you and I have today in sitting here across across from each other virtually is proof positive that, in spite of all that has happened, we have moved forward. So that's one piece. The other piece, then, I would say, and I go back to you touched on Emmett Till. I will invoke Martin Luther King here, who during his "I Have a Dream" speech warned against what he called the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, meaning that part of the challenge is that sometimes we see little wins and we slow down, right? So you've got the bumps that stop you, or the wins that slow you down. The trick to all of this is accelerating forward, right? What do we need to do? What do we need to pull forward to today to say, we're not going to take comfort in the wins that we have had, because, quite frankly, the wins that we celebrate today are wins that we should have been celebrating a long time ago, right?
Absolutely right.
How do we sort of peer into the future and disrupt the future significantly enough that we pull those wins forward to today? And that'll be clunky work. That'll be messy work, because disruption is always messy. Disruption actually causes a bit of displacement and discomfort, but that is the work of equity, right? So I say that, I don't take any comfort in where I am today. I don't take any comfort in where my children are today. I don't take any comfort in where my unborn grandchildren are today. What I know is that there's a lot of work to be done if everyone is to enjoy their full franchise, franchise.
So yeah, I love that, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think those are like wonderful words for those, coming up in the game. This coming up in the game business, right? We talk about the black elevator of what this is, and ideally, we're doing what we can with our station and our stage to help make it a little easier for those. This is an interesting question. When for you, Bart, did it flip? When did you become not young, right? And so not a young up and comer to this spot where now we're dishing out wisdom. I always think about this as well. I'm like, I remember the feeling of like, all right, I'm young, I got the whole world ahead of me, and then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, now I got to pave it to make it even easier for people. Do you remember the moment or when that was for where that switch happened?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't honestly say that I know. I think it's in part how I was raised. Like, me and my siblings were raised to give back. And then, from as far back as I can remember, we were always in some form of a service organization volunteering. I was a Cub Scout and then a Scout for, most of my life until I started to work. And then I began to volunteer in organizations. I remember sitting on a board at 17 years old with professors and wondering how the heck did I get here. So I've pretty much been an old soul, if you will, most of my life. But I've always been, for the most part, conscious of the fact that I have had the privilege of standing on the shoulders of others and having them bring me along, people who look like me and people who don't look like me, right? But a
Mm-hmm.
pair of shoulders is a pair of shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And, regardless of the shoulders you sit on, you learn how to create space for others on yours, right? And so that
Right.
so that becomes rote, if you will. You just learn how to do it, and you just do it naturally. But the other thing I would say in answer to your question is that as my career progressed, I have never lost sight of the fact that the people that have been kindest to me don't look anything like me. The people that have helped me advance my career, don't look anything like me. That juxtaposes against the people that have been meanest to me, also don't look anything like me. In fact, the
Mm-hmm.
people that have been kindest to me look just like the people who have been meanest to me. But where I have always taken hope is the fact that the people that have been kindest to me outnumber, significantly outnumber, the people that have been meanest to me. So I
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
hope. And I just have this belief that society is going to be better and is going to create greater opportunity for those that look like me and you, because
Mm-hmm.
people ultimately want to do the right thing. So when you talk about,
Absolutely. Yeah.
when did it flip for me in my career? It was, I think, quite frankly, just taking stock of what
Mm-hmm.
good, enabling, empowering behavior looks like, and just replicating that for the benefit of others.
I don't think you could repeat that more. And I think that's one of the most common traits that I've seen with people who have a clear path, feel confident where they're at, and understand what they can offer the world. It often is also the same people who don't focus on the outliers or let's just call this a negative comment on social media, or that one teacher that said they couldn't, right? When that flip, and that lens changes to, okay, so there was one, but let's take that same amount of time and focus on all those who've provided positive support, uplifting, and hands up. And it really does change a person's worldview. And I really do want to hammer that home for a lot of listeners too. That idea that it's so easy to fall into, whatever that negative thing is. And as you've mentioned, there's going to be many bumps, and bumps have sometimes negative feelings with them. But we have choices of what we do and what emotion we put, our energy into. And you're a beautiful example of be involved from an early age, take stock of what you've accomplished regardless of how hard it's been, and accelerate, keep moving forward. So then as you're accelerating, what are we looking for? What's going to put some smiles on Mark's face in 2022? And I want this personally and career wise. What do you have planned? Although sometimes it's best laid plans, as we know, but right now, as you know, what are you looking forward to in the new year?
Yeah, so I mean, like everyone else, I'm hoping that we can put COVID behind us, and that we can all begin to recover, to a point where there's less stress around mental health, less stress on families. Young people have a greater sense of opportunity ahead of them. Organizations can actually continue to focus on how they sort of resequence their DNAs, their corporate DNAs, to be increasingly more inclusive and with a greater focus on equity. That we close the social equity gap. That there are fewer and fewer people on the margins. That we actually, you know, we take stock of the fact that we are in fact doing real damage to the climate, and that we all get to a point where we say collectively, if we don't fix this, we are not going to leave a healthy climate for future generations. um, those are the things that I'm actually very much focused on as I think about next year and in the years to come. On a personal level, I'm looking forward to finishing up a book that several books that I am sort of trying to pen and getting those published by the end of 2022. I've
Oh,
been
I
really
like it.
active in the last year because I've really had to sort of spend more time focusing on supporting my team and things like that. But I love to write. and will be
Okay,
published.
well, wait, I'm gonna put you to task a little bit. You said a bunch of books, right? So, I mean, which is the book that you want done in 2022? Say it, let it happen. So now the world's gonna know, and you gotta finish up. What's it about? Don't give away too much. We got copyright license, but what are we doing? Are we doing young adult, nonfiction, fiction, sci-fi?
So it's no one book is really on leadership, right, and the lessons I've
Yeah.
learned along the way
Mm-hmm.
as a leader and from some of the best leaders that I've worked with. And then the other really is a collection of poems, because I write poems, and so
Excellent. I love it.
and the poems actually capture my experience, my lived
Mm-hmm.
experience, tells some of the stories in very sort of graphic but enabling terms. Some of the poems reflect on, for example, what must have been the journey of those who were snatched from the grasp of freedom to the grasp of subjugation, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, in spite of all of that, here I am today, being able to tell my story. My ancestors must have been the lucky ones, had a bit more fight, or just were lucky. I don't know, and but that fuels me. So it's
I
a
love it.
collection
I
of
love it.
a collection of stories.
Yeah, obviously, best of luck into that. I can't wait to read those and listen to some more. I'm gonna say this. You tell me what it does for you, because this was the future. That was the future. We've talked about the now. But if I were to say Manchester, England, England, across the Atlantic Sea, you did tell me about your origin story.
Yeah, well, so thank you. So, I was born in Manchester, and a child of parents who left Barbados in the 50s to
Mm-hmm.
go to England to study nursing and accounting and so on. So myself and my siblings were born there. And so my formative years were there. And then, of course, through a series of events, I ended up moving with my mother and siblings to Barbados. Went to school in Barbados. Actually, I lived in Canada before we moved to Barbados. And then, of course, did high school, started my career there, got married there, moved back to Canada, did school in England and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had a rich and rewarding career. I've met some fascinating people along the way. And I will tell you, Jesse, if you had told me back then, as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, dreaming about being able to visit Niagara Falls, for example. Back in the days, you'd have postcards and you'd see Niagara Falls and you'd say, I want to see
Right.
this place. And then, or you would see, the Cape of Good Hope and the Horn of South Africa. I want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Had you said to me as a dreaming kid way back then that I would actually have the privilege of doing that, I'd have said, "Oh, you're full of it," right? And yet,
Yeah.
I've been able to do that and more, right? Coming from a
Mm-hmm.
small island that is, 14 miles long and 16 miles wide at its largest, at its widest point, population of 290,000 all in. Being able
Mm-hmm.
to see the world and rub shoulders with world leaders, with corporate titans, and be able to, work alongside 88,000, 89,000 colleagues across the globe who are all committed to supporting clients whom I'm proud to work alongside of. I'd have told you were on something, but that's been
Mm-hmm.
that's been my journey, and it sort of keeps me grounded, keeps me humbled, and makes me always want to pay it forward. And it makes me think about, how do I, through my work, create value for the organization that I work for? How do I create value for the society that I'm privileged to serve? And
Mm-hmm.
how do I be the best version of myself, given the opportunity that I have?
Mark, I've had many conversations with many individuals. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. There's just so much. I feel that you just are offering to myself, to those who are listening. And it's just exciting to share some space and energy with you. I fully appreciate you being on the Black Elevator. Thank you kindly for being here.
No, thank you, Jesse. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Important that you tell these stories and continue to encourage us. We need this. So thank you so very much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
There's nothing that I wouldn't do for your love. Not even an ocean I wouldn't cross. You're my everything. I never felt this way.
You were just listening to Stannis Smith. Now, Stannis and I actually have a little bit of history. Both of us attended Morehouse College. That's where I actually met him and our friendship began. But since then, he's gone on to many amazing things. But I do love the story of how his career started in 1998 on the iconic Apollo Theater in Harlem. Stannis, a sophomore at Morehouse at the time, stepped onto the stage, national spotlight, singing Jodeci's rendition of Stevie Wonder's soul-stirring song, Lately. His Showtime appearance highlighted his creamy vocals, which you had just heard, and I can't wait for you to tune in, check out, and hear more of Stannis. Thanks for tuning in to The Black Elevator. I'm Jesse Lipscomb.